going to continue on with John 11, starting off at, actually I want to start off at, 27, because when I read, it's been a while, I always like to go back and read the last sentence that I read to get me back into it, and this one works perfect. She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unblind him and let him go." I'm going to let Pastor Wilson take it from here.
Before I do that, lately, in the last few years, whenever I've sung There Is a Balm in Gilead, I can't help but think of an independent film that came out probably 20 years ago now. It's called The Spitfire Grill. Has anybody seen The Spitfire Grill? If you haven't, look it up on Netflix or wherever you might be able to find it and watch it. It's filmed in Vermont, but it's supposedly set in Gilead, Maine. And the town of Lovell, in a particular establishment in Lovell, has a mention in that movie. But it's a very strong movie, powerful message about redemption in that movie. So I would encourage you to watch that. Let us pray. Holy One, as we've heard this powerful story of Lazarus and Mary and Martha and Jesus and the disciples, there's so much there. It's a wonderful story. Help us to find ourselves in the midst of these people, in the midst of that time, with Jesus and his disciples, with the sisters grieving, standing before that tomb. Help us to be there, that we might fully understand and feel all that they feel. Amen. Well, there's a lot of talk about mental health today and various concerns about mental health, but one would think that perhaps the most prevalent mental health problem in our world today is depression, which it is a significant one, but anxiety, an anxiety disorder, believe it or not, edges out depression. Not only in our country, but in the world. 275 million people in our world suffer from some sort of anxiety disorder. And according to psychology today, anxiety has been increasing, as we all probably have personally experienced. It says today that the average high school student today has as much has many stressors or feels the stress in their lives on an anxiety level as the average psychiatric patient did in the early 1950s. The reasons for this, experts say, are many, along with the traditional stressors like poor health, poverty, difficult relationships, work stress, loneliness. There are a host of new ones. Now we have 24-hour perpetual connectivity through social media. And with all of the technology that we have today, there is the need or the expectation to multitask across a range of different activities. The lack of real, and then in the midst of all this, there's still that lack of real social connection because of this connectivity through social media. Add to this, those of us who are a little bit older and so forth, there's the worries about growing all this technology, so there's the worries about scammers and hard drive crashes and data breaches. And worn down by all of this, what do? We go home and we plop down on the couch and turn on the TV, and there is increasingly sensational 24-hour news channels and fervent news flashes and trailers streaming across the bottom of the screen as if what is on the screen isn't enough. They got to remind us of all these other things that are going on in the world. And all the latest alerts. And then there's always that doomsday scenario. You know, if it bleeds, it leads. If it's bad news, it sells. You know, and then on top of that, we expect everything in an instant, don't we? I mean, some of us older folks, no, we don't. We're not like the younger generation. Well, how many of us use Amazon's click here and buy now? Slick, isn't it? So easy. And when it isn't delivered when we think it should be, we grow anxious. Where is it? I've been tracking it. It's supposed to be here today. It's not here today. Where is it? Yeah, they say that, right. They can say that, Jonathan. You're exactly right. Yes. You know, look at how often we complain. Like, we didn't get any mail yesterday. What's that all about? We complain when the mail doesn't arrive when we think it should, you know. My mom probably remembers this well. I can remember it well when we were kids. You know, in August, we would put together the new clothes for school order. Get out the Sears and Roebuck catalog, right? How long did it take for that order to get there and back? 2 weeks at least, right? And remember, it was a handwritten order. And you mail. Yes, it would take a couple of weeks. And now, if Amazon doesn't get it to us the next day or the day afterwards, yeah, we get anxious. A lot of stress in today's world, and we maybe put a lot of it on ourselves. But in today's scripture reading, the sisters of Lazarus had some legitimate reasons for anxiety. Jesus, accompanied by his disciples, had been teaching. Jesus finishes his instructions, and it's on the Good Shepherd, what he was teaching in chapter 10 of John. He's also contended with some religious authorities near the portico or the porch of Solomon during the Feast of Dedication at the Temple in Jerusalem. And after this confrontation, Jesus retires to a secluded area across the Jordan River, presumably to rest and pray. While he's there, Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, has taken ill and lies near death. The sisters send word and ask Jesus to come as quickly as he can. And without any explanation, Jesus stays there for 2 more days. It wasn't until after this rather obscure teaching about Lazarus' death being something that the Son of God will be glorified through does Jesus leave. When Jesus eventually informs his disciples that, hey guys, we're going to Judea again. Disciples, they aren't too keen on the idea. After all, they had just been there, and the religious authorities hadn't taken too kindly to some of Jesus' teaching. In fact, in the 31st verse of John 10, we can read where they had taken up stones to kill Jesus. Thomas, in the end though, while willing to follow Jesus, assumes that if they follow him, they very may well be going to their death. But Jesus says he has work to do while there's still opportunity to do it. So they go off to Bethany to see his friend Lazarus. And arriving at the home of his friends, they find that Lazarus is quite dead. In fact, his body has been in the tomb 4 days. First Martha and then Mary essentially say the same thing to Jesus. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus consoles them with that oft-quoted line of Jesus, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever believes in me will never die. We hear that verse a lot, but we don't often hear that little bit after that, where Jesus looks at Martha and says, do you believe this? We're told that when Mary brings this question to him, Jesus is filled with emotion and weeps with them. Or is he weeping for them? Eventually, the entourage proceeds to the tomb of Lazarus, where we read that Jesus asked for the stone to be rolled away. Now 4 days is a long time in that climate for a body to be left in the tomb. The smell could be detected outside the tomb before it was even opened. It was the popular belief at that time that the soul of a deceased person hovered around the physical body for 3 days and then left. So Jesus' arrival after 4 days is well past the point when Lazarus would have been considered, if you will, completely dead. Jesus prays to God and then speaks into the tomb with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! And I had the opportunity, Don and I did when we were in Israel, to go to the tomb of Lazarus. And when I was standing there looking down into that, that's all I could hear was Jesus' words echoing, Lazarus, come out. What happens next is the stuff of movie scenes. It must have left those there, gathered there, completely dumbfounded. For out of the cave emerges this body completely wrapped in the cloths used to prepare a body for burial. Jesus calls them to come and unbind him and let him go. There under the burial linens is their brother Lazarus. We're told that many who had come with Mary and seen all this came to believe in Jesus. Powerful story. But there's one troubling aspect of this story for me. It's always been there, and that is Jesus' apparent nonchalance about arriving in a timely manner. Placing ourselves with the sisters and even his disciples, I would ask, and we might ask, what is wrong with Jesus? Why is it taking him so long to get going? He knows, he's heard. Doesn't he care about his friends? This waiting on Jesus tends to create anxiety. We want him to get there and 3 days ago. And for those with faith like Mary and Martha, we count on Jesus to be there for us. But when he doesn't seem to be there, we worry. Will Jesus ever come quickly enough to help us? Didn't he say, and surely I am with you always? One of the greatest problems of life and of faith for many of us is that living between the urgency of life and the resolution of our emergencies. This is where faith enters in. Faith is the absolute trust that God will reconcile all things in and at the right time, which may not always be our time. In John's Gospel, Jesus is often quoted saying, "My hour has not yet come." This implies that the time is not yet right for Jesus and his identity to be fully revealed. This revelation will occur, just not quite yet. Only when God's time becomes our time. Yet, isn't our prayer, my prayer has often been like the poster or the bumper sticker, "Lord, grant me patience, and I want it now." We all have difficulty living through those in-between times. Between the job interview and the notification letter. Between the medical procedure and the doctor's call with the results. Between the promise and the fulfillment. Between the prayer and the answer. The tension can be unbearable. Our anxiety at times almost undo us. Sometimes it does undo us. For Martha and Mary, Jesus' assurance that he is the resurrection, Jesus' assurance to them is that he is the resurrection and the life. This promise is one that they can hold on to because they know him and they trust him. God empowers Jesus to raise Lazarus, not so much as to resurrect him, but to show hearers and readers who Jesus is. We would like Jesus to, back at the beginning, to snap his fingers and bring Lazarus back to life. Yet, like those in Bethany, we must allow God to work through time and pain and our own limited understanding to bring about that resurrection. Now, this story gives us a lot to stew over, a lot to think about, because in this, God indicates to us just how much we need God. The title of this section of John is often called in the Bibles the raising of Lazarus, but it could just as easily be titled Waiting for Jesus or Waiting for God. Waiting for God to work in our lives is never easy. Perhaps we shall always be anxious about it. One chief article of faith, however, is that we believe, that we trust that God will act. We just don't know when or how. The most believers can confess is that we will believe in God and trust God in God's good time and wait. But while we wait, we can develop a strategy, if you will, an attitude for addressing our waiting anxiety. For most often, there is something to learn or to be gained by patience and learning to wait faithfully. It was Charles Spurgeon, the great 19th century preacher, in one of his sermons shared an example of one way to understand and deal with the worry of waiting. In the year 2080 BCE, the outmanned army of Sparta's king Leonidas held off Persian troops of Xerxes by fighting them one at a time as they came through a narrow mountain pass. Commenting on this strategy, Spurgeon said, "Suppose Leonidas and his handful of men had gone out into the wide open plain and attacked the Persians. Why, they would have died at once, even though they might have fought like lions." Spurgeon continues by saying that Christians stand in the narrow pass called today. If we choose to battle every difficulty at the same time, we are certain to suffer defeat. But if we will trust God and take our troubles one by one, we will find that our strength in God will be sufficient. Jesus took his time to get to Lazarus' tomb for one reason. The reason he stated at the beginning of this story: this illness does not lead to death, rather it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God, may be glorified through it. It may make us anxious, but it is God's power that saves us. And this is something that, and often, in spite of, our best efforts to hurry the process along comes in God's time. God grant us patience and peace while we're waiting.